Welcome to Watercolours with Caroline. Over the summer I thought I would do a few short videos for beginners and young people and anyone that wants to get started with watercolour and needs some little projects and some tips. So we're going to start off with a lovely easy sunset and step-by-step instructions, and if you have any questions just please ask them in the comments. I will answer your questions, and please like and subscribe to my channel. It doesn't cost you a thing and it really helps to build my channel. So thank you very much for watching. Let's get some paints and some paper and get started. So this is the little project that we're going to work on today, a little sunset in portrait orientation, and I have a piece of Arches 140-pound cold press paper. I cut one 22-inch by 30-inch sheet into 25 pieces. Makes it very affordable. You can buy paper in a little pad like this. This is just paper, it's not cotton like the Arches paper. It's quite nice. It was $8.95 for this pad, and you get 15 4x6 sheets. Now if I buy a piece of Arches paper I can get 90 pounds for about $10, 140 pounds for about $12, and I can make 25 sheets from that of 4.5 by 6. Some of them have to be 4 3/8. You just have to be a little bit careful, but I find it more affordable, and the 100% cotton paper is so lovely to paint on. It doesn't really matter, I don't think, what cotton paper you buy. Some are better than others. This is just the one I like. So if you're starting out in watercolor and you want some inexpensive supplies, I recommend just buying any sort of brand of paint that you can find for a reasonable price. I have all kinds that I really like. I use my artist quality most of the time, but I also have some student quality paints that work perfectly well. These paints are made by Hake. They're about $10 for a box. I have 24 sets that I use for school and for beginner painters. They're lovely colours. They're made with glycerin. They're not really expensive watercolours, but they do a lovely job. And if you don't want to spend much money, they're a great buy, Hake. I also have a couple of little boxes. This is my Koi watercolour box by Sakura, and I like to take this one away with me. It has a lovely little palette in here, quite a nice colours. It came with a little water brush, and you can fill these little pots up with your tube paints if they run out, or you can buy new paints from Koi as well. That's quite a good option. It's not that expensive. This little set I got from Walmart. I think it was $4.80 or something, ridiculously inexpensive, but they have them at Michael's for about $20. This is made by Reeves. It came with a lovely little brush, tiny little palette, and the colours are very good for a student quality paint. They wet up really well. So you don't have to spend a lot on paint if you just want to get started. Some are better than others, but a lot of the inexpensive ones are very good these days. You can also get by with, I like good brushes, but you can get by with inexpensive brushes. I like these ones for students. They're called HJ series, white Taklon. A little one like this, $2 or $3. One like this, $5 or $6. Pretty much all you need, but I like my good brushes. Also, you would need a pencil. I like a little propelling pencil. It's easy to get nice fine lines. A very soft eraser. Don't erase on your watercolor paper too much. It kind of destroys the surface, so be really careful with your eraser. And I like the Micron Pigma pens. They're waterproof, but if you can't afford that, a really great option is the Sharpie fine tip. It's a little thicker than these. You can get these in different sizes, but it's waterproof and it does the job. So you don't need much more than that, a water pot. And for today's little project, you don't have to have this, but it's useful. This will make a little white spot for our sun. So when you take the sticker off, you either have a white space for the sun, or you can fill that up with yellow paint if you want to, as I have with this one here. It's easier to fill it up after you've painted everything. And that gets us a lovely round sun. So I'm going to put my horizon line on here with my little pencil, And if you're doing a horizon line, don't have it going through the center of your painting. That's not good composition. We've got lots of sky in this painting, so I want about 1.5 inches, 1 3/4 for my horizon line. I'm going to put it down here. I'm going to get that line on the green tape there, and 1.5 inches, and just a light line. Don't dig in to the paper with your pencil, because it will show up after you finish painting and you won't be able to erase it. So a very light touch with your pencil. And then I'm going to stick on my sun sticker, the sun setting, and again, don't put it right in the middle. It's not good composition. Just going to put it off to the side, just setting down here. We want it to show up. Give it a good press down. There we go, and then we're ready to paint. So to start off, we need to wet the paper all over. This makes it much easier to blend your sky and paint, and unless you have a lot of experience painting, this is going to be the best way for you to paint your background and your skies. So you need a biggish soft brush. I have this lovely brush, or a cheapish Hake brush, which you can pick up for just a few dollars. I use this one for now, and it's nice and soft. So you want to make sure that you wet everything on your paper. We're going to paint the whole background sky all in one go, and then figure out what we're going to do afterwards. So I want to make sure I get it good and wet, which means I go back and forth a few times and then just tip it to check that it's shiny and wet all over. Otherwise my paint's not going to flow very well. There we go. I'm going to start with a nice bright yellow. Whatever nice bright yellow you have in your paint set. Usually it's called cadmium yellow. Mine's called Azo Yellow. It just needs to be bright. And we're going to put this yellow definitely over that sun so that it shows up. Over the horizon line so that we get some reflection in our water, whether it's a lake or the ocean. I always seem to get hairs and stuff all over my paper. That's just the nature of what happens to me most of the time, probably other people. I need a cloth. I use a cloth to just control the water on my brush. You can see it's still nice and shiny and wet. We need it to stay wet, otherwise this is not going to work. You can then get a red from or an orange, or a beautiful colour from the sunset. I'm using one called Vermillion and some cadmium red mixed together. And I'm going to start at my green tape, and I'm going to streak that red across, or orange, whatever you want to use. But don't go overboard. Don't cover up all your yellow with this. See, I'm going from the side and then lifting the brush so that I get some streaks. I'm going to put some purple at the top and bottom of the sky, and the purple and the yellow will make grey, so I have to do something to stop that happening. And what I can do is use a pink that works well with purple. Now, permanent rose or quinacridone rose, or any colour that has rose in the title, even alizarin crimson in a pinch, will do this for you and help you. I can put this rose colour, I've just got some rose on my palette, I can pull it across between the yellow and the white paper that I've left ready for the purple, or blue if you want. Up to you what you put in your sky. That pink going through the yellow is also very pretty. You don't want to put too much colour. If you put too much colour, your white paper doesn't glow through. So now I'm going to get some purple. Now you can either use a violet from your palette, or you can mix a purple, but you have to be careful. You've got to mix a pink with a nice bright blue to get a good purple. Otherwise it's not going to work. So I'm going to just mix mine. I have what's called a Phthalo Blue, and I'm mixing that with permanent rose because that's going to give me a bright, beautiful, bright, clear purple. You can also get purples called Dioxazine Violet. You can get ultramarine violet, not as intense. if you just mix yellow and blue, you will possibly get grey. You have to have a lot of colour theory to do some good mixing of purples. If you get to that point and you feel you want a little bit more pink, I can see my paper's still nice and wet. That's the advantage of cotton paper. In that buffer zone between the pink and the purple, I can add just a little bit more pink, or permanent rose is what I used, just to get that to have a little bit more intensity. Now, don't keep going. Beginners keep on going. They keep on adding paint and more paint and more paint, and pretty soon it's thick and you can't see the glow of the white paper and all your yellow disappears. It's so important to know when to stop painting. So I know that right now I've got to stop painting and I've got to dry this or let it dry. You can either walk away, have a sandwich, which I'm going to do, and let it dry, or you can get your hairdryer or your heat gun out and you can dry it a little bit. But don't do that too soon. If you put your hairdryer or heat gun on here too soon, all of this beautiful blending of wet paint is going to stop. You're going to stop the paint before it sinks into the paper and before it does all this lovely wet in wet blending. And you'd be surprised if you just walk away from this for a half an hour and come back. You'll be so surprised by what it's done all by itself without your help. Unfair, isn't it? So I'm going to go have a sandwich. To remove the sticker without leaving any residue, you need to heat it a little bit with a hairdryer or a heat gun. It will just peel off after a few seconds with your hairdryer, and make sure your painting's perfectly dry before we move on. For the next stage, we're going to do a little bit of drawing on here, and we need to make sure that it's perfectly dry before we do that, because if you try and draw on damp or wet paper, you're going to damage the paper and not get very good pencil lines. So what I want to do is put in a couple of mountain ranges that the scenery I see every day. I live on Vancouver Island in British Columbia in Canada, and when I look across the ocean where I live, I see the mainland mountains. It's something I love seeing. So I'm very familiar with this scene, and I know that if they're far away, they're probably 40, 50 kilometers away, although they're very large mountains, they're going to appear quite small because they're in the distance. So we don't want to make these mountains big things. They're going to be quite small and low down, and don't make them all pointy. They're not pointy, they're just kind of slowly go up and down. There's some that are bigger, there's some that are smaller. Sometimes they go up and down like this. There needs to be a range of them, different heights. And then I want to have a little range behind that. You don't have to. If you want just one range, you leave it at that. But I want a few coming from behind, just like I see every day in my scenery here. So there's one behind there. Now, the thing to do is not to make them all repeat the same pattern. Our brain loves repeating patterns, and it does it without us noticing or realizing. And sometimes that can be very detrimental to a painting. So I've got two ranges here. Now, I can either fill these in with watercolor paint, or if I feel they're too small for me to do that, I can fill them in with either pencil crayons, or I have some watercolor pencils here. Now, if I use watercolor pencils, I'm going to use a sort of a blue. If things are far away, they're much lighter and they're much bluer because of the moisture in the atmosphere. And if you make things lighter and bluer, it puts them into the distance. So I can put that on with watercolor pencils. I'm going to get a small brush. This is my number 2 brush. I'm going to do small detail. And I can wet that pigment up from the watercolor pencils. And that way it gives me a much more control. If I'm a little bit nervous and new to painting and I'm worried about keeping my paint in the right place, this is a great way to go. Now, another way you can use the watercolor pencils is use your brush and just paint your brush onto the tip of the pencil, and then use the pigment that's on your brush. And I've got a little bit of violet. I'm just adding it to the blue. And I'm going to suck a little bit of that up with what's called a thirsty brush. That's a brush you've sort of dried. And then I can use it like a sort of little vacuum cleaner. I don't want too much pigment there. So those are watercolor pencils. Now these Prismacolors are wax-based pencils, so they're not going to dilute with water. And if that's all you have, or if you have Crayola pencils, then you can use that. Now the watercolor paper, because it has some texture, means that they're not going to look smooth. They won't have a smooth look to them. So think about that, and that's why it's kind of nice to use a watercolor pencil if you have them. Don't use anything you don't have. This is purely to give you some options for what you would like to use. I think like a lilac color. We've got lilac in the sky. Put lilac in the foreground. I can put a white pencil over the top of this too. I have a white wax one, and if I put white over the top of that lilac, I can make it more of a pastel color and dilute the color down that way. I also have, if I can find it, sorry, I'm making a noise. I also have a blending pencil that just has clear wax in it, and it will blend the colors nicely. But you do get the watercolor paper texture when you do this. So these are just options. On this one, let's use some watercolor, because you may be wanting to do your whole painting watercolor, which is a great thing. So I'm going to get that very small brush again, number 1 or number 2. I work mainly in round brushes, that's my preference. But some people like a square flat brush, that's their preference. And remember, I made some lilac earlier for the sky. What I used was some permanent rose, which is probably one of my favorite colors. Mine's a Winsor & Newton. It's a professional color, so it's very intense. And I also used some Phthalo Blue, because that's a lovely, cool, clear blue. And if you mix those two together, you get a lovely violet color. You can vary the amounts of each, and it's beautiful. You can also buy violet colors. I really like this one, which is Dioxazine Violet. It's very strong, and if you didn't want it that blue, you could mix a little bit of rose with it to get a very similar color. The other thing I want to do is have the background mountains a little bit more blue. So Cobalt Blue is what's called a warm blue, a gentle blue. I'm going to get some cobalt. Let's put my pencils out the way for a minute. Back in their tin. I'm going to get some Cobalt Blue, mix it with a little bit of that violet, so it's sort of a violet-y cobalt. Makes it even warmer. And make sure I've got enough water with it, because water makes things lighter. If you're using oil paints or acrylic paints or pencils, you'd add white to make it lighter. In watercolor, we add water. Now, I'm going to paint both these mountain ranges with this color, and as I put them on the yellow, it's going to look quite grey, because the yellow and the violet mixed together, they are complementary to yellow and violet, opposite on the color wheel, and if you mix them together or layer them over the top of each other, they look grey or make grey. So I'm going to add a little bit more blue to some of these. I'm working on dry paper. I want to make that clear. We did the wet in wet sky on wet paper, but you're not going to be able to control these lovely sharp mountain outlines if you paint on wet paper. They'll all blur and dissolve, and you won't see them. I think a lot of beginners in watercolor don't quite understand the difference between working wet in wet or on dry or adding water afterwards. There's lots of different methods, and it's very difficult to learn them all. And if you've got an unsteady hand and you can't keep that horizon line straight, then put a piece of masking tape over that horizon line before you start your mountain range. A lot of people have trouble keeping their hand steady to get a nice straight line. I rest mine on the paper. You should probably have something. I should probably be much more careful and have, say, a piece of paper or a Kleenex to rest my hand on, like this, because you can quite often pick up some paint on the back of your hand, or there's oil on your hand too, which makes oil on your paper, which is not good. And if I'm doing a big professional painting, I will use all of those tools, of paper to lean on and paper towel and all that kind of thing. So I'm going to pause for a minute because I want to dry this before I show you the next step. I've dried that with my hairdryer, and now my mountain range is dry. So at this point, I can put in the forward range, the range that's closer, because things that are further away are lighter. And if I just did the far away mountains first and then the close-up ones, I would have a line between the two, and I may not get one lighter than the other. I may struggle with that. Now I know if I put a second layer on here, it's definitely going to be darker. It has to be putting 2 layers of paint. So I'm going to use the little bit of the cobalt with the permanent rose this time. And make sure that it's not too dark, because when you go in with your second layer, like putting tissue paper over the top, you're going to get much darker with the second layer. So I want those foreground mountains closer to me to look darker. That will push the other range into the background. Sometimes if I'm painting for myself, I'll have them even lighter than this. And I will do that by adding some water first, just to the mountain area. I'll demonstrate this one. So I'd add a little bit of water here, not all over the paper, just here, just a little bit. And then the paint can flow into the water and it can sort of just dilute the look. Again, you have to be careful using these techniques, because if you're new to watercolor, you'll find yourself adding too much water and you'll get what's called cauliflowers or backruns or unpleasant happenings that you learn to control as you get a little bit more experience with the medium. So you can see now that I've got 2 layers of exactly the same dilution of paint, pretty much, but one layer on top of the other really makes one stand out. Now I'm using the thirsty brush again. Thirsty brush means you wash your brush, you dry it a little bit so it's just damp, and you can use it like a little bit of a vacuum cleaner to just take up a little bit of the extra paint that maybe you feel is too much. You have to be very careful with this because you can end up taking off too much, and then again you get brush marks. If you do this properly with good paint, you won't see any brush marks if you've got the right amount of water and you're careful. Now this has to dry before we can do the next step. But while we're waiting for that, you can decide, do you want your setting sun white or do you want it yellow? Now I'm going to paint mine in yellow. This is wet, but it's not touching the sun. I have a choice. I can have lemon yellow, I can have gamboge, which is an orange yellow, or I can have my Azo Yellow, which is like a cadmium yellow. I'm opting for lemon at the moment. Very light. And the thing is, if I do a light lemon sun and I change my mind, I can come back and make it darker later if I want to. But if I make a dark orange one right now and change my mind, I can't really take the paint off. So I'm going to start with a lemon sun, like that. I'm going to get a little bit of gamboge. I'm going to go a little bit fancy. A little bit of gamboge, which is an orangey yellow. I'm just going to, at the edge there, remember I've got a tiny brush, add a little bit of that warm orangey gamboge, just on the edge of that sun. Just change it up a little bit. And I don't want to overdo it. I want it to show. And now I have to let that dry again, or dry it with a hair. Here's where you have a choice again. You can either use your black pen and put in some grass in the foreground, or we can paint this. So first of all, I want to just show you with the black pen on one of these old ones that I did for a little class of grade 2 children who did a fabulous job. So you want to make sure that your grass has movement. That means they're not straight up and down. We want some, and we want it going up into the sky too. We don't want it tiny little grass down here. It's dramatic. It's the foreground. So make sure that your grass curves, and you can do it with pencil first if you like. Make sure it has some curve to it. And a very simple way to do the grass seed is to have like a little seed on the top, and then you're going to have the little seeds on each side of the grass head like this. You can put them close together or far apart, and quite often there's some leaves too, depending on what kind of grass this is. I have 3 or 4 just reference photos of grass in front of me just to help me get the shape. And there's some bits of grass here and there. They definitely should come up into the sky. See, these go up. And another little thing, I know it's a little bit tacky on a good painting, but for these cute little paintings, it doesn't hurt to have a few little birds in the sky. Just because this is a cute little painting, you can make this into a nice greeting card for someone. So that's how you can do this grass if you want to use a black pen to finish it off. I'm just doing one more little seed head here, and I'm going right over the top of my sun. And we don't want too much, you don't want to overdo it, you want to have some space left. It's always good to have some space left for the eye to rest as it goes around your picture. But if you would rather do this with paint, then we can do it with paint too. Now let's get my painting where you can see it. And it helps sometimes to do a little bit with your pencil first. So I want to make sure I have a nice curved grass head here. I'm going to just draw the stem. I have another one coming over here. And then I'm going to cross over the stem here. Have one coming over here. Kind of nice to have things go in front of each other. A shorter one. Maybe it has one coming off of here. And maybe another one here that's got a bit of a curve. Again, we don't want to overdo it. Put a few in to start. And I'm going to use my brush to help me make these. Now there's all kinds of brushes. You can use your little tiny number 1 or number 2 brush that I had here somewhere. They go walkabout somewhere. Here it is. Or I have what's called a rigger or a liner brush. I like these script liners from Princeton. I have one that's a very tiny one, 2/0. And you know what? You should never mix your paint with these little tiny brushes. It'll damage them. So I'm going to mix my paint with a bigger brush. And I want to have a very dark colored paint. So I can either use a dark paint, which is like, I'm going to add the Payne's grey to the violet here. I don't like black. It's okay if you're using black ink, like India ink and a black pen. They're kind of a nice clear sharp black, but paint, I find black paint very dead and dull. So I have the D violet there and some Payne's grey. I'm going to add a little bit of ultramarine blue to that. And see, I'm using more paint, less water this time. Big brush to mix them. Don't use your tiny brush to mix or you'll destroy it. I should actually use an old brush to mix, so I don't destroy my good ones. And then I'm getting a little bit of sepia. See how dark that's making it? That's a lovely colour. Especially you want the violet in there because it complements all the yellow in the picture. I have a good amount of paint mixed up, and I've got this tiny script liner, and I'm going to roll that script liner roll it. I don't want to damage it in any way. It's very delicate. Roll it in the paint, and then I like to go from the thick part of the stem to the thinnest. Put those actually, that's hard this way up. Sometimes I turn it upside down to do that. Put those stems in for the grass. I'm actually going to start at the top because quite often I do this upside down. I don't want to twist it around for you. And it'll be fine. Now the reason to have very, very light pencil lines is sometimes you don't want to use your pencil line as you get going with your brush. You feel a little more free if you don't use your pencil line. And then I'm going to, with the little tip of this script liner, I'm going to put in the seeds on the head of that grass. Now different varieties of grass will have different seeds. If you want to find your own reference picture with your own idea, then you go right ahead. It could be wheat. I do another painting that's wheat in the sunset, which is a little bit more defined. Wheat has the ears sort of coming off of it. This is more grass. I have a bigger script liner here. This one is a number 2. Can't have too many brushes, you know. Actually, I have way too many brushes. You couldn't get by with 1 or 2. I'm just greedy. So I'm going to use this one for just the grass. It's thicker than the other one. And if I want, I can get my bigger brush and add a little bit more blue, a little bit more purple to this. I can even add a little bit of green if I want to. Remember, it's sort of silhouetted, so I have a little bit of Vermillion here that I'm going to add. It's silhouetted, so you won't see much colour. Silhouetted in the setting sun. I want to have kind of like grass coming all over the place here. And again, don't overdo it. Not too much. If you overdo things, you get a mess. And I might use this slightly bigger script liner brush to put in the seed heads. And remember, if you feel nervous about doing it with a brush, you can do it with the pen or your colored pencils, or you can get some scrap paper and you can practice with your brush first and do some practice ones. I often do that when I'm teaching painting trees with students, because they need to have a few goes trying it before they do it on the final painting. And same for anybody doing something for the first time. When I'm deciding what colors I want to use for a painting, I usually try them all out on scrap paper or cheap watercolor paper to start with. And you can have a few little dots here and there of seeds. Some can be smaller, and so forth. Some of the reference photos I have quite dense grass, and then the taller grass with the seed heads coming out of that dense growth. But you don't want to take up too much of your painting with this. You want to leave room for the eye to rove around the painting and enjoy it. Enjoy the space. I'm going to leave that like that. I'm going to use my Pigma pen because it's much smaller than my other one, and I'm going to put those little birds in. Flying around out there, maybe one here. If I wanted to use a smaller pen for a few really tiny seed heads, I could. If I feel like my paintbrush is a little bit over the top for any of those, I can do that. Really important thing to do, I think, if you're happy with your painting, is to sign your name. Not too big. Don't make a big deal of your name or your signature, and keep it at the bottom out of the way. Let's zoom out a little bit. Oh, I don't think, oh, there we go. Sometimes my camera doesn't want to do that. And let's just take the tape off, because everything looks better once the tape comes off. Always hold the corner of your paper when you pull the tape off, because I have torn so many corners of the paper by whipping the tape off too quickly. The tape by the way, for those of you that don't know why we use it, keeps your paper nice and flat while it's wet because the paper buckles up as it absorbs the water. And if you make sure it dries with the tape on, it will flatten right out. Also, if you're doing a little painting like this and you maybe want to make it into a card or just put it in a little inexpensive frame, what you have is you have a nice little white border around your painting so that it's nice and crisp and clean. And you can just pop that on top of some coloured paper and pop it in a frame, or pop it on top of a card, and you have something just lovely to give as a gift. So I hope you enjoyed that one. Let me know how yours turned out. I'll always answer your questions, and maybe check out my Watercolours with Caroline on Facebook. You could ask to join my page to post your pictures there, and good luck with your painting. See you soon. Bye now.